gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to LBS's portion of the Rotary Youth Speaks Competition Regional Finals. My name is Blessing Park and I shall be your chairperson this afternoon. Now I'd like to introduce the rest of my team. Firstly, Kirsty Exley is the proposer of the vote of thanks, and Harriet Aldair is our main speaker this afternoon. It is my great pleasure to introduce our main speaker, Harriet, or Hattie, as she's affectionately known amongst her peers. She will be delivering a speech entitled 15 Minutes, exploring the provision of social care in our country for vulnerable adults today. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the issue of social care is very close to Hattie's heart. Her younger brother Rupert is severely autistic, and it's her experience working with him and other vulnerable children that has prompted her to explore further the provision in our country not only for children, but also for vulnerable adults. She joined our school as a new student last year and very quickly became a very prominent of our school community as both a prefect and the head of her very own house, Whitbread. She's a very well-seasoned public speaker, and she's transferred this natural confidence onto the stage as an excellent actress and earning a grade 8 Lambda qualification. Hattie hopes to continue her passion and experience in social care to further education by studying a degree in social work. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before I invite Hattie to speak, I must urge you to take to heart the issues which she addresses. They are so prevalent in our society today. Now, on that, I would now like to invite our excellent main speaker, Hattie Aldair, to take the floor.
15 minutes, 1/4 of an hour, 900 seconds. This is currently the average time allocated for over 60% of councils in the UK for home care visits for people today. To qualify for state-funded home care, individuals require rigorous assessment to ensure that they're suitably vulnerable. The majority of these people are elderly, with a high percentage suffering from an age-related mental impairment. Care needs can be defined as anything, from helping someone get washed and dressed, preparing a meal, to emptying catheters or simple feeding. Care workers are currently being put in the untenable position of having to prioritise which care function should fit this 15-minute time slot. My grandfather suffered from dementia. It would often take him 15 minutes to process who I was, let alone anything else. Research has proven consistently that elderly people fare best when care is provided in their own home. If that care is not forthcoming or robust, then hospitalisation often follows as a result of falls or infection. Over 55% of hospital beds are currently occupied by the elderly, and over 7,000 beds in the NHS could be freed up if better local care was provided. Now, I'm not naive. Limited funds, coupled with an ageing demographic, there are currently more 65-year-olds in the UK than 18-year-olds, means we can't realistically expect unlimited care to be provided. But surely this care should extend beyond 15 minutes, 1/4 of an hour, 900 seconds. Is this what our elderly population deserve? When asked, many local councils justify this allocation of time by stating that the care provided is adequate. Perhaps it is in straightforward situations, but mental illness is rarely straightforward. Try asking someone with Alzheimer's when they last had a drink or something to eat. Let us look at this for a moment from the other end of the telescope. Would we ever consider it acceptable to provide a young child with 15 minutes of care and then leave them to fend for themselves? None of us here this afternoon would surely countenance leaving a child in a nappy for hours at a time, allowed to become dehydrated. It would shock and disgust us all. Yet this type of occurrence is increasingly commonplace. and is happening as I speak to elderly and disabled people in thousands of homes across the UK. It is perhaps an ironic coincidence that on one of the few occasions this country does spare 15 minutes and more to consider our elderly, it's when the Prime Minister and assembled dignitaries gather at the Cenotaph, as he did a few months ago, to pay their respects to those who fought and died for their country. And yet the lonely veteran who survived this horror is treated in a way he would never have imagined. Is anything changing? Successive governments have known for years that the cost of care for our elderly population was an issue that needed to be tackled, but have done nothing concrete to address the issue. Yet they promote the value that will be derived by spending 50 billion plus on a high-speed rail link to save commuters' journey times by 1 hour. Well, I guess it's about priorities at the end of the day. The problem of our Asian demographic is not going to go away. It is short-sighted in the extreme to ignore it and pass blame and responsibility on local councils, who are under increasing pressure to save money whenever they can. Neither is it acceptable to rely on charities to take up the slack, or to rely on family members. Many 70 and 80-year-olds are acting as main carer, with their own health being compromised. Our elderly population has surely earned the right to some form of dignity and support. All too often, it is younger family members who find themselves having to deal with the care system on their behalf, because their parents are of an age where they don't want to make a fuss or be a bother, or may not have the mental capacity to communicate their needs. My own grandparents were at serious risk before help finally arrived as a result of strenuous effort by my parents. My grandfather was finally granted 3 15-minute slots 3 times a day for 6 weeks, after which they were required to access private care. This is the norm, by the way. Sadly, my grandmother couldn't manage, and my grandfather ended up going into a care home. He rapidly declined and died 6 months later. An urgent review of care for the elderly and disabled in the UK is surely required. If thousands of children were dying prematurely as a result of neglect due to lack of funding, a solution would be found. Yet exactly the same is happening to many of our older citizens. Right now, as I speak. This speech lasted 6 minutes. Another 9 minutes, and your time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Hattie, for that emphatic speech. I would now like to pass on to Sue Doughty to pose her question to Hattie.
Thank you very much, Hattie. I think a lot of us in the audience, having gone through that generational thing of worrying about parents or having it yet to face, understand very much what you're talking about. As a politician, and we have quite a few local government politicians in the audience as well, who have to face this same problem, that children, for some reason, get far more attention than elderly people in terms of votes, in terms of moving up the political agenda. Is there anything we can do to help politicians understand that actually it's older people who vote, and perhaps it might be in their interest to start voting for parties who will take the needs of vulnerable people, whether it's children or adults, much more seriously?
Thank you, Sue. So what she's asking is, how do you suggest that we can alter the perception amongst politicians and amongst voters that, in fact, instead of just focusing on the youth and the younger generation, we need to have more of a focus on the vulnerable elderly?
That's a really interesting question, thank you. Well, I think the major issue here is the lack of urgency. As David Cameron said when helping the flood-stricken areas recently, money is not an issue. Now, I'm not saying these people shouldn't be helped, but in my mind, our elderly, who are incredibly vulnerable, this is a massive crisis. I think MPs need to kind of consider their decisions carefully, considering that in the 2013 local elections, over 70% of voters were over the age of 65. Now, they're not exactly appealing to their demographic. I think the issue here is a sense of priority. Now, I read in the news this week that more funding has been applied to aid the development of the HS2 train, to save commuters' journey times by 1 hour. Is this really a priority compared to our vulnerable elderly? Personally, I don't think so. It's up to MPs to make the difficult decisions. That's their job. As an ex-MP, I'm sure you're very much aware that there isn't an unlimited pot of money available. We can't just throw money at the situation. But the money needs to come from somewhere, and the money needs to come now, because this issue is not going to go away. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, for your very interesting question, and thank you, Hattie, for your very strong answer. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to pass on to the very capable hands of Kirsty Exley to propose the vote of thanks this afternoon.
Chair, ladies and gentlemen, the pleasure has been bestowed upon me to propose the vote of thanks, following on from our astute main speaker, Hattie. Such a powerful and relevant topic of discussion, close to so many of our hearts, was examined with great clarity, and on behalf of the audience, I would like to thank and congratulate Hattie for her performance. The manner in which she intertwined statistical evidence and real-life exemplars created a speech that was both informative and emotive. I particularly enjoyed how Hattie opted to look upon her subject from the other end of the telescope, making the shocking comparison between the ill treatment of the vulnerable elderly and the neglect of a young child. This drew attention to society's differing reaction to the neglect of these two generations, something that is perhaps particularly enlightening, as it is a harsh truth that is often left unconsidered by many, including, until now, myself. Furthermore, what was equally impressive was the scope of Hattie's exploration when outlining her argument, which spanned government aims and political policy to her own personal experiences. I also admire the depth and confidence with which Hattie was able to respond to Sue's question. I truly believe that the fluency of her answer proves just how well Hattie knows her topic. In her speech, Hattie made it explicitly clear that 15 minutes could be the difference between life and death. But this risk is one that should not and does not have to exist in a modern, socially and economically developed nation. Therefore, to bring this vote of thanks to a close, I urge you to consider the limited things that you could achieve in a 15-minute period, and join me in giving our passionate and talented speaker another well-deserved round of applause.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, before I bring LVS's portion of this competition to a close, I would like to echo what I said in my introduction. What Hattie discussed in her speech is the reality, the harsh truth. And before we leave you this afternoon, I urge you again to take to heart the issues that she addressed. We need only turn on BBC News to see how important this issue is. So, I would like to close LVS's portion of this competition. Thank you for being a very attentive audience, and we hope to see you again. Thank you.